When we speak of angels working behind the scenes, we are not speaking of fairy tales meant to distract the weary mind, nor of poetic symbols invented to comfort children in the dark. We are speaking of a reality that operates quietly, deliberately, and often invisibly, even while the noise of the world insists that nothing good could possibly be happening. Most of what truly shapes our lives does not announce itself with trumpets. The most decisive moments are rarely loud. They are subtle, almost shy, unfolding while we are busy worrying, doubting, or trying desperately to control outcomes that were never meant to rest entirely in our hands. You see, there is a curious habit we humans possess. We judge the nearness of deliverance by what we can see. If the walls are still standing, we assume the prison remains intact. If the storm has not yet broken, we conclude the skies are unmoved. Yet history, both sacred and ordinary, tells us a different story. Long before the door opens, the lock has already been weakened. Long before the dawn appears, the night has begun to retreat. The work that matters most is often completed before the evidence reaches our senses. Consider how easily we mistake silence for absence. When prayers seem to echo back unanswered, we imagine the heavens have gone quiet. But silence does not mean inactivity. A watchmaker does his finest adjustments in stillness, not in spectacle. Likewise, the unseen realm does not rush to satisfy our demand for instant reassurance. It works with patience, precision, and a timing that often offends our impatience. Angels do not scramble, they proceed. They do not panic, they obey. And while we pace the floor counting the hours, they are already carrying out instructions that were issued before we even knew how to ask. Deliverance, in our minds, tends to look dramatic. We expect chains to fall in a single moment, enemies to retreat overnight, and wounds to heal without leaving a trace. But more often, deliverance arrives disguised as endurance. It comes wrapped in strength you did not know you had, wisdom you did not ask for, and restraint that keeps you from making the very choice that would have prolonged your suffering. Sometimes the miracle is not that the trial ends, but that it does not destroy you. And behind that preservation, behind that quiet resilience, there is help you cannot see. It is worth noting that angels, if they were to be fully visible, would likely frighten us more than comfort us. Their work is not sentimental, it is serious. They stand at thresholds, guard paths, redirect dangers, and intervene in ways that feel, to us, like coincidence or luck. We call it timing, we call it chance, we call it intuition. Rarely do we pause to consider that something or someone has been sent ahead of us, arranging what we will later describe as just happening to work out. Think back on moments when disaster seemed imminent, yet somehow missed you by inches. A decision you almost made, a road you nearly took, a word you were about to speak but didn't. At the time, you may have chalked it up to instinct or hesitation, but what if that pause was not weakness? What if it was intervention? What if restraint itself was deliverance in its earliest form? We often pray to be rescued from outcomes, not realizing we are already being rescued from causes. The unseen help working on your behalf is less concerned with theatrics and more concerned with results. It does not merely aim to remove you from trouble, it works to transform you through it. And this is where our expectations frequently clash with reality. We want escape. Heaven often offers preparation, we want immediate relief. The unseen realm often provides long-term freedom. There is also the uncomfortable truth that some battles must be fought, not because help is absent, but because growth is required. Angels assist, but they do not replace. They strengthen, but they do not infantilize. A muscle unused will weaken, no matter how well protected it is. In the same way, your faith, courage, and discernment are developed through resistance. What looks like abandonment is sometimes training. What feels like delay may actually be alignment. Deliverance, when it comes too early, can rob us of depth. If every prayer were answered the moment it was spoken, we would learn little about trust. We would confuse faith with convenience and obedience with transaction. The unseen help around you understands this far better than you do. It knows not only where you are trying to go, but who you must become in order to arrive there without being crushed by the weight of what you asked for. It is easy to believe in unseen help when life is kind. The real challenge comes when circumstances appear to contradict every promise you hold dear, when doors remain closed, when the diagnosis does not improve, when the betrayal cuts deeper than expected. In those moments, the idea of angels at work can feel insulting, as though you are being asked to smile at a story while standing in real pain. But the presence of pain does not negate the presence of help. In fact, pain is often the very environment in which the most significant interventions are taking place. Behind the scenes, there are things being restrained that you never encounter, conversations that never happen, attacks that never reach you, opportunities that are delayed not to punish you, but to protect you. If you could see how many disasters have already been diverted, how many burdens quietly removed before they ever reached your shoulders, you might tremble less at the ones that remain. We tend to imagine deliverance as something entirely external, a change in circumstance, a shift in environment, a removal of pressure. But some of the most profound forms of deliverance happen internally. The moment fear loosens its grip, the moment bitterness loses its flavor, the moment despair is interrupted by a thought you cannot explain but refuse to dismiss. These are not accidents of psychology. They are signals that help is nearer than you think. Angels do not always bring you out of the fire. Sometimes they stand with you in it, ensuring that what was meant to consume you only refines you. The world teaches us to mise your success by escape. The unseen realm measures it by transformation. And this difference in measurement explains why we so often think nothing is happening when, in fact, everything important already is. You may feel today as though you are standing still while life moves past you. But stillness is not stagnation. Seeds do their most important work underground, where no applause can reach them. Roots spread in darkness, not in sunlight. And when the time comes for growth to appear, it does so suddenly, leaving observers to wonder how it happened so fast. What they do not see is how long the work was already underway. Deliverance has a direction. It is not random. It moves you toward freedom, not merely comfort, toward truth, not illusion, toward wholeness, not dependency. And because of this, it sometimes dismantles before it restores. It allows certain supports to fail so that stronger ones can be established. This dismantling can feel like loss, but it is often mercy disguised as disappointment. Angels working behind the scenes are not offended by your questions, but they are not governed by them either. They do not require your perfect understanding to proceed. They work with your willingness, your honesty, your small acts of trust offered even when certainty is absent. A whispered prayer, uttered more out of exhaustion than faith, can still set unseen things in motion. You do not need eloquence to be heard. You do not need clarity to be helped. You need only to remain open enough not to close the door entirely. There is a strange comfort in knowing that the burden of orchestration does not rest on you. You are not responsible for aligning every outcome, predicting every threat, or securing every future provision. Your role is participation, not omniscience. The unseen help around you is not waiting for you to become flawless. It is working precisely because you are not. If deliverance feels delayed, it may be because what is coming must arrive whole, not rushed. A partially formed rescue can be more dangerous than no rescue at all. Timing in this sense is not cruelty but care. The unseen realm is not hurried by your anxiety, though it is deeply aware of it. It responds not by speeding up recklessly, but by ensuring that when the moment comes, it will not unravel under pressure. Even now, while you listen to these words, there are movements you cannot track, alignments you cannot map. Answers to prayers you prayed years ago are stirring, not because you reminded heaven of them, but because the appointed moment has drawn near. What feels forgotten to you has not been forgotten at all. It has been waiting. You may be closer to deliverance than your emotions will allow you to believe. Proximity does not always feel like progress. Often it feels like resistance intensifying, as though opposition senses that its time is short. The darkest part of the night does not mean dawn has failed. It often means dawn is near, and the unseen help around you does not grow weaker as pressure increases. It grows more deliberate. There is a quiet assurance available to you, not the loud confidence that denies pain, but the steady confidence that endures it without surrendering hope. This assurance does not come from circumstances improving overnight. It comes from the deep, almost instinctive knowledge that you are not navigating this alone, that even when your strength falters, support does not, that even when your understanding collapses, purpose remains intact. If you listen closely, you may begin to notice the subtle signs: a door closing that saves you from a worse fate, a delay that redirects you towards something better, a conversation that arrives at precisely the right moment. These are not grand spectacles, but they are not meaningless either. They are the fingerprints of unseen assistance, quietly reminding you that your story is being guided, not abandoned. And so you stand in this moment, perhaps tired, perhaps uncertain, perhaps wondering how much longer you can hold on. But what you cannot see is how near the turning point truly is, how much has already shifted, how many pieces are already in place. Deliverance rarely announces its arrival in advance. It prefers to surprise, to arrive at the moment when you are most convinced nothing will change, and then to unfold with a steadiness that makes you realize, only in hindsight, that the help had been moving toward you all along, step by step, moment by moment, long before you ever sensed it drawing near, long before your heart was ready to believe that what you have been waiting for was already making its way toward you, quietly, deliberately, and with a precision that has not yet finished revealing just how close it truly is. That closeness, though unseen, begins to change the way you breathe, even before it changes the way you live. There is a subtle shift that happens when deliverance draws near, a tension that feels both heavy and expectant at the same time. You may notice that old comforts no longer satisfy you, that familiar distractions lose their power, that patience becomes harder precisely because something within you senses movement. This restlessness is not a sign of failure, it is often evidence of preparation. When the ground is about to break open, it first tightens. You might wonder why, if help is so near, the weight feels so real. But proximity to freedom does not always feel light. Sometimes it feels like the last climb before the summit, when your lungs burn and your legs tremble, not because you are going the wrong way, but because you are going higher than you have ever gone before. The unseen help around you is not alarmed by your fatigue. It understands that weariness is not the same as defeat. You can be tired and still be protected. You can be discouraged and still be guided. You can be unsure and still be moving in the right direction. There is also the quiet truth that deliverance often requires separation before it brings restoration. Certain attachments must loosen. Certain illusions must fall apart. Certain voices must fade into the background so that you can hear what truly matters. This can feel like loneliness, like being misunderstood, like standing at a distance from things that once felt essential. But distance is not always loss. Sometimes it is clarity. Sometimes it is the necessary space in which your vision adjusts and your heart recalibrates. Angels working behind the scenes are not merely focused on removing obstacles. They are equally concerned with removing dependencies that would have limited you once the obstacle was gone. What good is an open door if you still fear walking through it? What good is freedom if you carry the same chains internally? Deliverance that not address the inner landscape often leads us back into the very captivity we prayed to escape, and so the work continues, quietly, patiently, reshaping not just circumstances, but desires. You may find yourself revisiting old memories, unresolved emotions rising to the surface without warning. This, too, is part of the process. What is buried but unhealed has a way of resurfacing when change is near. It is not meant to overwhelm you, but to be released. The unseen help around you does not stir these things to torment you, but to free you from their hidden influence. Healing often feels like disruption before it feels like peace. We tend to romanticize rescue while overlooking refinement. Yet refinement is often the greater mercy. To be saved from pain is good, but to be changed so that pain no longer defines you is far better. This kind of transformation cannot be rushed. It unfolds layer by layer, choice by choice, as you learn to respond differently to the same pressures that once broke you. And each small shift, unnoticed by the world, is noticed by those working quietly on your behalf. There is a remarkable consistency to unseen help. It does not grow impatient when you stumble back into doubt. It does not withdraw when fear speaks louder than faith. It continues its work with a steadiness that does not depend on your emotional state. Even your resistance, your questions, your frustration are not barriers unless you allow them to harden into refusal. Doubt can coexist with obedience. Fear can exist alongside courage. What matters is not perfection, but persistence. You may feel as though you are repeating the same lessons, facing the same patterns again and again. But repetition does not always mean stagnation. Sometimes it means reinforcement. A truth must be encountered multiple times before it sinks deep enough to reshape behavior. A boundary must be tested before it becomes firm. A lesson must be lived before it becomes wisdom. And each return, each encounter, is met with support you cannot see, ensuring that you are not merely going in circles, but spiraling upward, even if the progress feels slow. There is also the matter of perspective. From where you stand, the path ahead may look cluttered, confusing, even pointless. But from a wider view, there is a coherence you cannot yet discern. What feels like a detour may be the only route that avoids a greater harm. What feels like delay may be allowing other pieces to fall into place. The unseen help guiding you does not operate with a narrow focus on immediate relief. It works with a long view that takes into account outcomes you cannot imagine yet. You are not being led aimlessly. Even the pauses have purpose. Even the waiting has direction. The stillness you resent may be preventing you from stepping into something prematurely. The frustration you feel may be sharpening your discernment. The unanswered questions may be training you to trust without requiring constant explanation. These are not punishments, they are preparations. It is tempting, in moments of weariness, to demand signs, to ask for proof that something is happening beyond what you can see. But unseen help rarely indulges spectacle for its own sake. Its assurance is often quieter, woven into moments of unexpected calm, unexplainable resolve, or a sudden clarity that cuts through confusion. These are not dramatic, but they are deeply sustaining. They are the kind of reassurance that strengthens rather than entertains. You may notice that your tolerance for what once wounded you is changing. Old triggers lose their sharpness. Old fears no longer dictate your choices. Old voices that once held power over you sound increasingly hollow. This is not because you have become indifferent, but because you are becoming free. Freedom does not always announce itself with joy at first. Sometimes it arrives as neutrality, as the simple absence of compulsion, as the quiet realization that something which once controlled you no longer does. Angels working behind the scenes are not merely reacting to crises, they are anticipating them. They move ahead of you, arranging encounters, placing buffers, opening and closing access points in ways you will only recognize later. What you experience as a narrow escape may have been prevented long before danger reached you. What you interpret as bad timing may have spared you from an outcome you were not prepared to handle. There is a humility required to accept this kind of help, because it asks you to admit that your understanding is partial, that your perspective, no matter how sincere, is limited. This humility is not meant to diminish you, it is meant to relieve you. You were never meant to carry the full weight of foresight. You were never meant to see every angle. Trust is not a demand for blindness, but an invitation to rest in the knowledge that you are not the sole architect of your future. As deliverance draws closer, you may find that certain relationships shift. Some people drift away. Others step forward unexpectedly. This is rarely indom. Alignment affects connection. When your direction changes, your surroundings adjust. Those who cannot walk with you into the next season may resist or withdraw, not necessarily out of malice, but out of incompatibility. This can hurt, but it is often kinder than forcing bonds that would eventually break under strain. There is also the strange phenomenon of opposition intensifying when change is imminent. Old patterns attempt a final assertion. Old fears grow louder. Old temptations resurface with surprising force. This does not mean you are losing ground. It often means the opposite. Resistance frequently flares when its influence is threatened. The unseen help around you is not surprised by this surge. It has already accounted for it. You are not expected to fight alone. Strength is supplied as needed, often just enough for the moment you are in. This can feel frustrating if you are looking ahead and calculating everything you might need. But provision is rarely given all at once. It arrives daily, sometimes hourly, in proportion to your immediate capacity. This keeps you dependent, not in weakness but in relationship. You receive what you need when you need it, not before, not after. There is a discipline in learning to live this way, to trust provision that does not stockpile but sustains. It teaches you presence. It draws your attention to the now, where help is active, rather than the imagined future where fear tends to roam unchecked. The unseen help around you works most effectively when you are anchored in the present, responsive rather than reactive. You may be tempted to measure progress by external change alone, but internal shifts often precede R and L ones by a wide margin. The courage to say no, the willingness to wait, the ability to forgive without forgetting. These are signs of movement, even if your environment looks the same. Deliverance begins in the will before it manifests in circumstance. There is also a kind of mercy in not knowing exactly how close you are to breakthrough. If you knew the precise distance, you might grow reckless or complacent. Uncertainty keeps you attentive. It sharpens your awareness. It encourages you to continue showing up, even when enthusiasm wanes. Faithfulness in obscurity is not wasted effort. It is often the very thing that makes you ready to receive what is coming. Angels working behind the scenes are not impressed by performance. They respond to sincerity, to the quiet decision to keep going, to the small acts of obedience that no one applauds, to the choice to speak truth when silence would be easier. These moments, though seemingly insignificant, carry weight. They shape trajectories. They open paths that would otherwise remain closed. You may feel unseen in your struggle, overlooked in your perseverance. But unseen does not mean unvalued. Much of what matters most operates beyond the reach of recognition. Roots do not seek applause. They seek depth. And depth is precisely what allows growth to endure storms. What you are becoming in private will support what you carry in public. As this unseen work continues, you may notice a growing intolerance for superficial answers. Easy reassurances no longer satisfy you. You crave something sturdier, something that can withstand doubt and disappointment. This hunger is not cynicism, it is maturity. You are learning to distinguish between comfort that distracts and truth that sustains. And this discernment is itself a form of deliverance. There will be moments when you still feel overwhelmed, when the gap between promise and reality seems too wide to bridge. In those moments, remember that distance is not always measured accurately by feeling. Exhaustion distorts perception. Fear exaggerates obstacles. Weariness narrows focus. The unseen help around you is not influenced by these distortions. It continues its work with clarity, even when yours falters. You are allowed to rest without quitting, to question without abandoning, to feel without surrendering direction. Deliverance does not require you to suppress your humanity. It works through it. Your vulnerability does not disqualify you. It makes you receptive. A clenched fist cannot receive. An open hand, even a trembling one, can. And so the work continues, quietly, persistently, behind the scenes of your awareness. Not hurried, not careless, not indifferent. Each step taken with intention. Each movement aligned with a purpose that extends beyond immediate relief into lasting freedom. You may not yet see the full shape of what is coming, but you are already closer than you were before, closer than yesterday, closer than your doubts suggest. And even now, as you stand in this in-between space, The unseen help surrounding you is still moving, still adjusting, still preparing what remains to be revealed, ensuring that when the moment comes, when the shift finally becomes undeniable, you will recognize in hindsight that none of this was wasted, none of it ignored, and none of it ever truly beyond the reach of the help that has been with you all, along continuing its work, even now, in the quiet spaces where thought drifts and resolve feels thin. There is a steadiness holding everything together that does not depend on your awareness of it. You may sense it only faintly, like a low current beneath the surface of your days, but its presence is no less real for being subtle. This steadiness is what keeps you from unraveling when the strain grows heavy, what nudges you forward when motivation has dried up, what reminds you, without words, that stopping entirely is not an option you are meant to take. There is something profoundly human about wanting certainty before commitment. We want guarantees before we invest hope. We want clarity before obedience. Yet deliverance often asks for movement while the path is still dim. Not because clarity is unimportant, but because trust must sometimes precede understanding. The unseen help around you is not offended by your desire to know. It simply knows that knowledge, given too early, can harden into control rather than deepen into wisdom. You may notice that your prayers have changed. What once sounded like demands now sound more like conversations. What once focused on outcomes now lingers on endurance. This shift is not resignation, it is refinement. You are learning the difference between asking to be spared and asking to be sustained. And there is great power in the latter, because sustained people are not easily shaken by delay. The sense that you are being watched over does not always bring comfort at first. Sometimes it brings responsibility. When you realize that help is present, you also realize that your choices matter, that you are not drifting aimlessly, sly, but being invited to cooperate with a larger movement. This cooperation does not require heroics, it requires attention, a willingness to notice when you are being redirected, a humility to accept when something you want is not what you need. There is also a growing awareness that some answers will not arrive in the form you expect. You may never receive a single moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Instead, understanding may come gradually, stitched together from small insights, lived experience, and hindsight. Deliverance is not always a revelation. Sometimes it is a realization that unfolds over time, quietly reshaping the way you interpret your past. You may find yourself becoming less reactive. Where you once rushed to defend, you now pause. Where you once assumed the worst, you now wait. This is not passivity, it is discernment. You are learning that not every battle deserves your energy, and not every provocation requires a response. This restraint is not weakness, it is evidence that you are no longer driven by the same compulsions that once governed you. Angels working behind the scenes are deeply invested in this kind of freedom. Freedom from the need to prove, freedom from the urge to control, freedom from the fear that if you do not act immediately, everything will fall apart. They work to create space between stimulus and response, because in that space you discover choice, and choice is the foundation of genuine deliverance. There may be days when progress feels imperceptible, when the distance between who you were and who you are becoming seems negligible. But growth is rarely linear. It curves, pauses, and sometimes doubles back, not to trap you, but to strengthen you. What feels like regression may actually be reinforcement, giving you another chance to practice what you have learned under slightly different conditions. You are not expected to carry every lesson with perfect consistency. You are allowed to forget and remember again, to stumble and recover, to misinterpret and be corrected. The unseen help surrounding you is not tallying failures, it is supporting formation. It measures success not by flawlessness, but by direction. Are you turning toward truth even slowly? Are you becoming more honest, even if it costs you comfort? These movements matter more than you realize. As deliverance approaches, there is often an invitation to release narratives that have sustained you but no longer serve you. Stories you tell yourself about why things are the way they are. about who you are allowed to be, about what is possible for you. These narratives may have helped you survive, but survival is not the same as freedom. Letting go of them can feel like losing a part of yourself, but what you are actually losing is a limitation that once felt like identity. You may feel exposed without these familiar explanations, unsure how to interpret your experience without them. This vulnerability is not a mistake. It is a threshold. On the other side of it lies a truer understanding, one that does not depend on fear or resignation. The unseen help around you does not rush you across this threshold. It stands with you as you decide, moment by moment, whether to step forward. There is a tenderness in the way unseen assistance responds to your hesitations. It does not shame you for pausing. It does not coerce you into movement. It respects your agency, even while it gently encourages growth. This respect is itself a form of love, one that values your participation over your compliance. You may also notice a sharpening of your inner compass. Things that once felt morally ambiguous now appear clearer. Choices that once tempted you now seem hollow. This clarity is not self-righteousness, it is alignment. When your inner world begins to align with truth, external confusion loses some of its power. You become less swayed by appearances and more guided by conviction. Angels working behind the scenes are not invested in making your life easy. They are invested in making it meaningful. Ease can be pleasant, but meaning is sustaining. Meaning gives pain context. It gives waiting purpose. It allows you to endure what would otherwise feel unbearable. And meaning is often discovered, not delivered, through engagement with what is difficult rather than avoidance of it. You may still long for visible change, and that longing is not wrong. Desire for relief is human. But as you continue, you may notice that the urgency of that desire softens. It does not disappear, but it no longer dominates you. You begin to trust that change will come in its time, and that in the meantime you are not merely passing time, but being shaped by it. There is a quiet confidence that grows in this space, one that does not boast or demand recognition. It simply endures. It shows up again tomorrow. It does the next right thing even when applause is absent. This confidence is not loud enough to impress others, but it is strong enough to carry you forward, and it is supported, reinforced, and protected by unseen help that does not require your acknowledgement to continue its work. You are learning, perhaps without realizing it, how to live without constant reassurance, how to move without needing every step explained, how to trust that even when the path bends out of sight, it does not end abruptly. This trust is not naive optimism. It is hard-won, forged in the tension between promise and experience. As this formation continues, you may find that gratitude begins to emerge in unexpected places. Not gratitude for pain itself, but for what pain has clarified, for what it has stripped away, for what it has revealed about your resilience, your capacity to endure, your ability to adapt. This gratitude does not romanticize suffering, it recognizes growth, and recognition strengthens resolve. The unseen help around you is attentive to these shifts. It responds to your growing readiness, not with fanfare, but with further alignment. Doors begin to open that you no longer have to force. Opportunities appear that do not require you to compromise. Relief arrives in forms you might not have chosen, but that fit you better than what you originally asked for. You may not yet see the full scope of what is unfolding, but you are no longer where you were. Even your awareness of unseen assistance marks a change. Once you could not imagine, in trusting what you could not see. Now, even in uncertainty, you sense companionship rather than abandonment. This sense does not eliminate fear, but it keeps fear from having the final word. And so you continue, step by step, breath by breath, carried not by certainty, but by a growing assurance that what is working behind the scenes is not careless or cruel, but intentional and near. That deliverance is not a distant idea, but a process already in motion, that even as you navigate this moment, with its unanswered questions and unfinished stories, the unseen help surrounding you remains active, attentive, and engaged, still shaping, still guiding, still preparing what has not yet fully emerged, and still drawing you forward into what comes next, without haste, without spectacle, and without concluding the work that is even now continuing. And so let this be the truth you carry when the noise fades and you are left alone with your thoughts. You were never standing still, and you were never standing alone. What felt like delay was alignment. What felt like silence was instruction. What felt like weakness was protection working quietly in your favor. Every unseen step, every hidden intervention, every moment you were held together when you should have fallen apart, was evidence that deliverance was not a distant promise, but an approaching reality. You may not have recognized the moment when the tide turned, because it did not announce itself, but it has been turning all along. Trust that what has been working behind the scenes will soon make itself known, not to astonish you with spectacle, but to confirm what your soul has slowly learned to believe. That help arrived, lo, before despair had the final word, that freedom was nearer than fear allowed you to imagine, and that even now, as this season draws toward its appointed unveiling, you are stepping into a future already shaped by grace, guarded by unseen hands, and sustained by a purpose that never lost sight of you.